Tonight is a very special show in person with Tan Sri Simon Sipaun, expectations and hope for a better Malaysia. For the inaugural English version program, I'm honored and humbled to have the most respected and prominent personality in Sabah, particularly within the KDMR community, Tan Sri Simon Sipaun. Welcome to our channel, Tan Sri. How are you doing? Looking good and sharp as before?
Very good, thank you.
All right, before we start, let me briefly introduce to you all the background of Tan Sri Simon, especially to the younger generations who may not be familiar with Tan Sri Simon. Tan Sri Simon was the former Sabah State Secretary from 1988 to 1993. He was also the former Vice Chairman of SOAKAM, a vocal human rights activist and a respectful statesman. Tan Sri Simon was appointed as the Chairman of Institute Development of Studies, IDS Sabah, from 2018 until 2020. At the age of 84 years old, Tan Sri Simon has the vast experience to talk about the MH63, Sabah rights, and public servant affairs. So, without wasting so much time, Tan Sri, my first question to you, after 59 years since the formation of Malaysia, many Sabahans are still confused pertaining to its independence date. So, some say Malaysia has actually been independent for the past 65 years. Some also say it is our 59th Independence Day, while others mention that Sabah received her independence on 31st August 1963. May I know what is your view on this issue, Tan Sri?
Thank you, Matt. Historical records indicate as follows. Malaya obtains its independence on the 31st of August 1957. Sarawak obtained independence, some say, but in my view, it was not independence. At best, I can only describe it as internal self-government status on 22nd of July 1963. In the case of North Borneo and later Sabah, it obtained its self-government status on 31st of August 1963. Malaysia was formed with the merger of Malaya, Singapore, Sarawak and North Borneo on 16 September 1963. Malaysia has no Independence Day, since Malaysia has never been colonized by any foreign power. So Independence Day for Malaysia does not arise at all. In reality, what actually is happening is Malaysia is celebrating Malaya's Independence Day on 31st of August every year. Although Sabah's so-called Independence Day also falls on the 31st of August, but there is a difference in the year. It's the 6 years difference between Malaya independence in 1957 and self-government status of Sabah way back 6 years later, 1963. The day may be the same, but the year is different. In my view, North Borneo, as Sabah was known before it became part of Malaysia, on 16 September 1963, lost on that day the only opportunity to experience being a truly independent and sovereign nation with the ability to determine its own destiny and with a separate seat in the United Nations. This is my idea of independence, and this is something Sabahans never had. On 31st August 1963, the British, as I remember it, was still very much in control of the administration of Sabah. There is really nothing to be proud of to have so-called independence for only 2 weeks. There was not even enough time to warm your seat. The formation of Malaysia was simply, in my view, a transfer of power from Britain to Malaya, meaning from one colonial master to another. Negotiations which decided the fate of North Borneo were essentially done between Britain and Malaya. The literacy standard in Sabah at the time was low, to say the least, and the people generally did not understand what was happening and what were at stake. There was no referendum. The Kobold Commission was merely a commission of inquiry. Sabah was not even represented in the commission. The commission only interacted with a selected few and to fulfill what the British intended to take place. The commission's report concluded that 1/3 supported the idea, 1/3 in favor provided there were safeguards, and the remaining 1/3 were divided between those who preferred North Borneo to gain full independence first, and those who rejected the formation of Malaysia outright. It was interpreted as the people of Sabah and Sarawak supported the formation of Malaysia, despite the fact that only about 4,000 people participated in the Kobold Commission of Inquiry. And that's my response to your first question, Matt.
Now, we go to the second question. Many Malaysians, especially those from Malaya, claim that Sabah got independence through the formation of Malaysia, as what the first Chief Minister mentioned while delivering his first message during the declaration of North Borneo becoming self-independence on 31st August 1963. Let me recall his statement. The self-government that has been granted to Sabah by the British is the stepping stone to the ultimate independence through Malaysia when the big federation comes into being on 16 September 1963. To another point, there are no documentation to support the claim that Sabah got its freedom rather than being self-government. How do you look into this, Tan Sri?
My goodness, Matt, your question is quite a mouthful. Anyhow, I try and respond. Personally, I cannot subscribe to the contention that Sabah achieved independence through Malaysia. Malaysia was a new country. It's a formation of a new country altogether, and it was formed on the 16th of September 1963 through the merger of, as I mentioned earlier, Malaya, Singapore, Sarawak, and North Borneo. I do not see any connection between the formation of Malaysia and the so-called independence of Sabah. North Borneo had other choices, in my view. It could have demanded full independence first, before considering federating with the rest. This would have been a better choice. I'm inclined to believe Sukarno's impression at the time that Malaysia was a form of neo-colonialism. That was why he embarked upon the confrontasi campaign following the formation of Malaysia. Brunei opted not to join the formation of Malaysia at the 11th hour. It made a wise move. It remained a big fish in a small pond. Sabah chose to become a small fish and now a nonourished fish in a big pond. I do not think Brunei ever regretted opting out of Malaysia at the 11th hour. The citizens of Brunei, as we know, don't pay income tax. The citizens of Malaysia are being robbed by the kleptocratic government. Singapore seceded, or some say expelled, on 9th of August 1965. Today, Singapore is number 3 richest country in the world in terms of per capita income. Unlike Malaysia, Singapore has no natural resources, not even enough water for its own use. I never expected Singapore to last that long within Malaysia. Lee Kuan Yew's vision for the country was based on meritocracy. Tunku Abdul Rahman was based on Malay supremacy and Islam.
To the next question, do you agree with a statement made by the Deputy Chief Minister of Sabah, Datuk Seri Panglima Dr. Jeffrey Ketingan, that Sabah does not need an independence act to declare its own freedom, as the Malaysia Proclamation is a strong evidence of our independence. Therefore, the state government should gazette 31st August as Sabah Day to mark our independence. That's it.
While I agree that there is no necessity for Sabah to have a separate Independence Act, I have indicated earlier that Sabah really never experienced independence in the true sense of the word. At best, Sabah had about 2 weeks of self-government rule status, and during the 2 weeks prior to the formation of Malaysia, Sabah was still very much under the control of the British. The Sabah cabinet have hardly the time to be familiar with their role and responsibilities. This so-called independence, which lasted just 2 weeks, is not worth the attention that some leaders want to give. There is nothing much that we can really be proud of during the 2 weeks. It is not worth celebrating, in my view. Its people were never given the opportunity of going through the process of self-determination. An independent and sovereign nation must have a president or a prime minister and a foreign minister and a separate seat in the United Nations. It must have a foreign policy. It must be able to determine its own destiny. Sabah never had all this. It never fulfilled, in my view, the basic criteria of an independent and sovereign nation. So, what independence are we talking about? Now, coming back to Dr. Jeffrey, if I were him, instead of issuing statement, I should just act on it. After all, he's part of the state government and a deputy chief minister at that. Thank you.
True enough that he has the power. I couldn't understand why he's been saying about this Sabah Day since before he became into power. But when he is in the government, he can't even really fulfill it. Do you think it is something like just a politicking?
Matt, I cannot speak on his behalf. However, he being a politician, maybe you speak different context, different situation, different time. And I think he more, in my view, he's more speaking as a politician rather than on reality, the realistic look at the situation. Because I think, with due respect to politicians, I think they speak more than they actually act.
I do agree with you on that. But being a prominent figure in the KDMR, especially being the brother of our Huguan Siau, Tan Sri Pairin, Dr. Jeffrey never consistent.
I have described him in the past as very consistent, inconsistently. So he's consistent in a very inconsistent manner, you know. Speaking one, you know, like especially like on the PTI, when before he became into power, he speaks something else. But when he's in the power, is something else. So maybe being in that position, maybe he cannot help but being what he is. I'm not sure. So we can only give impression on what he does.
Okay, now to the next question, Tan Sri. Being a former senior government servant and having vast experience in an administration, what is your suggestion to put an end to all the confusions pertaining to Sabah's independent state?
First, very important that true historical facts must not be distorted, especially by people in power. They must, real facts must be reflected also in the history books that are being learned by students in school. Students must be taught the true facts of history. Political leaders can also play their role by not distorting true facts of history. It is said that history is subject to different interpretation. It is also said that history tends to repeat itself. Now, in this country, history sometimes could be the distortion of facts by the people in power. For example, in 2007, I remember seeing government billboards at the Kota Kinabalu International Airport, especially as you come down from the aeroplane coming from outside Kota Kinabalu. There's a big slogan, you know, saying celebrating 50 years of nationhood. Then as I leave the airport, begin to think which nation is being referred to. Then after thinking about it, it could only refer to Malaya, you know. And it says 50 years of nationhood. Can only refer to Malaya because the truth was at the time, Malaysia was only 44 years old at the time, to 2007.
Yes.
What does this indicate? To me, it indicates that the government, in particular the federal government, did not have Malaysia in its mind, only Malaya, you know. The federal government, for example, another example, took 46 long years to accept and acknowledge 16 September as Malaysia Day. Before that, the focus of attention had always been 31st of August, celebrated as Malaysia's Independence Day. In reality, 31st of August is Malaya's Independence Day and not Malaysia, because Malaysia has no Independence Day. There's nothing to celebrate on 31st of August as far as Malaysia is concerned.
Yes.
So our attention has always been geared towards celebrating 31st of August as Malaysia's Independence Day. But it is not. That's why I call this is a distortion of history. If a government cannot be truthful about something we still remember, not too long ago, if 1,000 years ago maybe, but this is, most of us are still alive to remember the date. And they're already telling you You're distorting the facts. So, if you cannot be truthful in that, how do you expect them to be truthful in more important things?
Now, in conjunction with the 59 Malaysia Day, can Tan Sri share your views on Sabah's progress in politics, social and economy before and after the reign of Barisan Nasional in Sabah?
Okay, Matt, to the best of my recollection, Malaysia had been ruled by the Barisan Nasional, dominated by UMNO for most of the time until 2018, when it lost power to Pakatan Harapan. It did not expect to lose power, in my view, whilst Pakatan Harapan also did not expect to win. The Barisan Nasional was previously, of course, referred to as the Alliance. Now, the political pattern in Sabah was very similar, except for the period when the state government was under the PBS rule, when it exited, it went out of BN. PBS was in power from 1985 to 1994. It left the BN on the eve of the 1990 general elections, but it did return again to BN in 2002. Unlike Sarawak, Sabah politics is very much dictated by KL leaders. BN is Malaya-based. Sabah leaders merely become their proxies. I notice Malaya has not much interest in the welfare and development of Sabah. I remember, for example, before Pakatan Harapan captured power, Sabah was promised 50% instead of 40% net revenue due to Sabah, and 20% all royalty instead of the existing 5% all royalty, also due to Sabah. But when it came to power, and then the Pakatan Harapan Minister of Finance just casually said, there's no money for Sabah. Just like that. Sarawak had more than 30 billion ringgit reserve. And the same minister had the cheek to say that Sarawak would be bankrupt in 3 years' time. I think the 3 years is almost over, and Sarawak is still very much alive as far as finance is concerned. I'm not a Sarawakian, but I also feel insulted. This is just some sample of the attitude Malayan leaders have for Sabah and Sarawak. From 1976 to 1985, Sabah was ruled by Berjaya, a multiracial political party. Sabah was then, in my view, bursting with energy. In terms of per capita income, it was only second to Selangor. In other words, during the period, Sabah was ranked the second richest state in the country. Now what happened? Sabah is now the poorest. Not what I say, but according to the World Bank. Currently, Sabah produces about 276,740 barrels of oil per day, which is equivalent to 42% of the country's production. This is followed by Terengganu, with 209,960 barrels per day, or 32%, and in third place, Sarawak at 173,350 barrels per day, or 26%. Now, in this year's budget, 2022 federal budget, it amounts to 332 billion. Now, out of that, Malaya gets 322 billion ringgit, equivalent to 96.99%. Sabah gets 5.2 billion, or 1.59%. and Sarawak gets 4.6 billion or 1.39%. Malaya, compared to Sabah and Sarawak, is already well developed, and by any standard rather. Financial allocation-wise, they only get the crumbs that fall from the master's table. This is adding misery into injury to Sabah and Sarawak. According to Tengku Razali Hamzah, Petronas pays UMNO 40 billion ringgit per year. This is, to me, wrong. How can you give national asset to a political party? Now, coming back to the Sabah, there is not a single day without power failure somewhere. Inadequate or lack of water supply, roads with potholes, lack of internet connection, dilapidated school buildings. School children have to walk miles to reach schools, lack of access to health and medical facilities, and the list continue. It makes a mockery of the slogan of the government, Sabah Maju Jaya. Mana itu kemajuan? The gap between the rich and the poor is getting wider. There is what I call an oasis of wealth in a desert of poverty. The situation has been, of course, aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Under the circumstances, it is difficult to attract foreign investors. This is before you take into account Malaysia's reputation as being one of the most, if not the most corrupt country in the world and ruled by kleptocrats. Gas is located in Kimanis, yet it is transported 512 kilometers to be processed elsewhere via gas pipeline costing billions of ringgit. Conventional economic and business wisdom tells me that raw materials should be processed as near as possible to the source to save cost. Oil and gas were discovered in Sabah much earlier than in Terengganu. Terengganu has oil refinery, but not Sabah. The Sabah government should inform the federal government the exact amount of areas due to the state government. If the federal government has financial constraint currently, payment by installments on the areas could be negotiated. However, there must be a time frame for the exercise. Now, as for the current 40% net revenue being collected, it should be diverted to Sabah immediately, whilst the federal government takes what it belongs to the state government, the 60%. In other words, Sabah should collect the 40% at source due to Sabah. This will save the federal government the trouble of collecting 100% first and then only to return later the 40%. Through this mechanism, you get the money immediately and you are assured of getting it, rather than the system that has been followed all these years, get 100%, but they never return the 40% that belongs to Sabah. The question of lack of funds through this mechanism does not arise, in my view. This would improve the financial position of the Sabah state government immediately, and the pace of development should accelerate considerably and could free Sabah from what I call the vicious cycle of poverty. This is just a glimpse of what is happening. It makes Sabah worse than being a colony of Malaya. Now, currently, following the trial and conviction of the former Prime Minister Najib Razak and his wife, I have reason to believe that there is still hope for Malaysia. I hope all remaining corrupted leaders will, sooner or later, face the force of law. Credit must be given to the judges involved, headed by young Ahmad Arif, the Lady Chief Justice, who passed judgment without favor or fear, based on law and facts, and not yielding to unreasonable pressure and also unacceptable pressure from politicians. Corruption and the abuse of power, in my view, must not be allowed to continue. Otherwise, we will be heading towards maybe Sri Lanka way. The riot must play their part also by electing untainted new political leaders who place public, general, and national interest before their personal and vested interest. I feel the time has come. Enough is enough. For Sabah to progress well and smoothly, political stability is a must. This being the case, Sabah must, as soon as possible, adopt the anti-hope legislation. It will go a long way towards the creation and maintenance of political stability. Economic and social progress is greatly dependent on political stability. Now, in moving forward, politics based on race and religion must be minimized, if not eliminated. There must be zero tolerance on corruption. Meritocracy must be observed and practiced. There must be inclusive development. Government assistance must be based on needs and not on race and religion. No community or individual must be left behind. We must not argue how to divide the cake, but work hard to increase the size of the cake so that in the end, each one of us will have a bigger piece. The youths of today are my hope for the future. Our future depends on what we plan and do today. We reap tomorrow what we sow today. That's about the response that I can give to this question, Matt.
Okay. All right, that's right. Before we end up, folks, allow me to read again towards the end of Tan Sri's answer just now, which is very interesting actually. No community or individual must be left behind. We must not argue how to divide the cake, but work hard to increase its size so that everyone will have a bigger piece. The youths of today are my hope for the future. Our future depends on what we plan and do today. We reap tomorrow what we sow today. So Sabahan must look into this. We've been tolerating too much. So come to this general election, I believe that we look into a better future, a better Sabahan. Thank you, Tan Sri Tohadan, for spending your time with us. I'm very grateful to have you in our channel. I'm looking forward to have you again in our future program, if you don't mind. And perhaps later on, in the future, we will talk more on Sabahan rights, which concerning to PTI. Again, thank you so much, Tan Sri. I believe it gives a very clear answer to all the confusions, especially on the independent state. So folks, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Before we end up, God bless you, Tan Sri.
Thank you.
And God bless Sabah. Happy 59 Malaysia Day.
Thank you.
Selamat malam.